Well, look, there's an inevitability to these state laws. I think most states are going to end up having a universal masking requirement. The only question is how much spread we're going to tolerate before we get there. This is the simplest thing we can do to try to preserve the things that are most important to us, keeping our schools open in the fall, businesses open where we can. At a federal level, what we can do is change the CDC guidance. Right now, the CDC guidance says that you should wear a mask when you can't socially distance. I think that that should be broader guidance at this point. You can't contemplate when you're going to be able to socially distance or not when you leave your home. And so I think in the setting of an epidemic, broad guidance makes sense. We now have enough literature demonstrating that if we can implement universal masking and getting a very high percentage of the population to wear masks when they're outside the home, not 100%, you're never going to get 100%, but the different studies show 80%, 60%, you get the R below 1.
But Dr. Gottlieb, I mean, this latest action in Texas is in response to the numbers getting to a place where we don't want them to get. So why shouldn't we be preemptive, even if that requires going a little bit too far, with something that's pretty simple, wearing a mask? We're not saying shut down the whole economy in full again. And that's, I guess, the question, to make sure we don't have more states that get to the position that Texas is in.
We absolutely should be preemptive, and it's unfortunate that these states, after some resistance, and they were resistant, are being driven to these measures only after they've had tens of thousands of cases accrue and a lot of hospitalizations, and we're going to see some excess death result from that. I think we have an opportunity to try to get this under control with interventions that we could take on an individual level, reducing our activity, socially distancing, trying to avoid congregate settings or not allowing them altogether, wearing masks on a universal basis. If we take all these measures, we could perhaps keep schools open in the fall, keep more businesses open, and do the things that are really important to us. It seems like a small price to pay, and it's over a short period of time. We're not asking people to wear masks for the next 2 years. This is really going to be a 4 to 6 month endeavor that we have to get through in the fall and the winter to try to keep this infection at bay until the point that it either just passes because we have some level of herd immunity because it's coursed through the population, or more likely and hopefully we have a vaccine in early 2021.
Yeah, and of course, another key piece to the puzzle is testing. We're starting to get these reports, starting to get these comments out of the administration right now that the coronavirus surge is straining testing capacity. When you see pictures of long lines in some of these states where case numbers are jumping to record levels on a daily basis, just how strained are we talking about? Where are the pain points? And I guess how does that compare to earlier on in the pandemic when there were issues around testing as that was getting online? Is this as big an issue as it was then?
Not as big of an issue. We have a lot more capacity in the marketplace. But what this demonstrates is we don't have a national market for testing. And we can't just swing around capacity when we have epidemics in certain states. And so while we might have plenty of testing right now in Massachusetts or New York to try to do routine surveillance, we don't have the capacity in the setting of an epidemic in Texas or Florida where there's backlogs on testing right now, long lines, as you said, and now shortages. The only real swing capacity in this country is Quest, LabCorp, and BioReference Labs. They're the ones who can pulse more testing into the markets where there's more demand. But even they have limited capacity to get surge testing supplies into those markets. And we're running short again on the things like pipette tips and cotton swabs. I thought we would have solved most of that problem, but it does appear that we still have some problems around this testing supply chain that we didn't expect to have at this point. We're going to probably have to contend with much more virus heading into the fall, and so we need to really get the supplies up and make sure the supply chain's more vigorous.
Dr. Gottlieb, this week on vaccines, we had some good news from Pfizer early in the week, less good news from Moderna today. Sum it up for us, and again, has the timeline changed from when we're likely to have something that's widely available?
I don't think the timeline has changed. I think that some of these statements around having a vaccine by the fall, the winter, was really timed to perfection, and nothing happens to perfection. The complexity isn't just in coming up with a vaccine that's immunogenic that can generate an antibody response. It's all the complexity in trying to scale up manufacturing and produce the doses at scale to supply a large population. And that's something the large companies do very well. Not just Pfizer, the company that I'm on the board of, but Merck is in this hunt, Sanofi, J&J, all companies that know how to produce vaccines at massive scale. So I'm confident that we will get a vaccine. All the early data suggests that we should be able to generate constructs that are going to going to allow for some level of immunity. But the timing of this is probably, at best, late 2020 or an early 2021 event. And so we need to get through one more cycle with this virus this fall and winter. And that's why we should be implementing things, as you suggest, like universal masking right now, to try to prevent large outbreaks and epidemics heading into the fall when we're going to have more risk. We're taking an awful lot of infection into the fall, and that's just going to increase the risk that we have larger outbreaks. And we want to try to preserve some of the gains we've made, frankly, in the Northeast and in northern states and Northern California, where we've really crushed the virus.
But, Dr. Gottlieb, we're just getting some breaking news that Regeneron and Sanofi are announcing their phase 3 trial of Kevzara. I might be getting the spelling, the pronunciation of that right, for vaccine on COVID-19. Is that something that's incrementally positive?
I'm not sure the product that you're referencing, if that's which drug that is. They have a number of drugs that they've been working on together. I don't believe that's their antibody drug.
My apologies. I only read the top line of this flash. In fact, the phase 3 trial of Kevzara for COVID-19 didn't meet its primary and secondary endpoints when it was added to best supportive care compared to the best supportive care alone, i.e. the placebo. So, in fact, so there's bad news on that Regeneron and Sanofi partnership to get to a phase 3 trial for that.
So I believe that's their IL-6 drug, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a drug that was being used to help treat the inflammatory response to the virus, the so-called cytokine storm, for people who had a severe inflammatory response. It's disappointing. There's other drugs being tested in that setting, but we've had a success in recent weeks with the use of dexamethasone in that same setting, steroids, that showed a profound improvement in mortality for both patients who were intubated as well as patients who required oxygen on hospitalization. And so we've had advances in that setting. It's disappointing to see that a drug not succeed, but we've had some successes in terms of improving outcomes for patients who are hospitalized and have severe COVID disease.
Yeah, of course, we'll continue to go through the details of that data that's just been released as well. Meantime, Regeneron is trading down about 3.5% in after hours right now. Finally, Dr. Gottlieb, the fact that the CDC put out guidelines or protocols this week around school reopenings, we started to get more details about what those reopenings potentially could look like in places like New York City in the fall. What do we know now that we didn't maybe know a couple weeks ago in terms of how this affects children, and what is the process, the path forward, I guess the most effective path forward for schools to start reopening?
Look, I think the most effective path forward for schools to reopen is to think about how to keep children in cohorts and not have large groups of kids intermingle. So we're talking about having kids wear masks in school, or de-densifying the schools. I think the most important thing is to try to keep the social networks small so that if you have an introduction in the school, you don't have a very large outbreak like what they're seeing in Israel. I think we should try to open schools this fall. I think many parts of the country can reopen schools this fall. But the parts of the country where you see epidemics right now in the Sun Belt, that's going to be difficult for local school boards to make the decision to open schools. And they're going to have to make those decisions in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And unfortunately, I think the situation down there in many states like Florida and Texas isn't going to look better in 2 or 3 weeks when they have to make those decisions. But this is one of the most important things we can do, is try to get children back in school for a whole host of reasons, many of which have to do with just the socialization of the kids and what's good for them.
Dr. Gottlieb, thank you for breaking down a variety of topics for us today. We appreciate it.